What's going on? Welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. We're recording here on a Saturday morning, December 3rd of 2022. And if you can tell, I'm flying solo again. My name is Tyler Plath, and I'm normally joined by Lucas Wenzel on our Stardom Saturday episodes, but he is out for this week. And the third piece that makes up the fellas, Cameron Lawrence, normally doesn't do our Stardom Saturday episodes. And I just thought about this before jumping on here. When was the last time Cam and I did an episode together? It feels like it's been a long time since that's happened. And that's got to change soon because I miss doing the podcast with Cam. I miss doing the podcast with Lucas. But you know what? To provide y'all with this good content, I'll ride solo again for this one. Again, we're recording here on Saturday morning, December 3rd, and we're going through our stardoms, and we're going to go through our Thursday night game recap. We'll go over some player props, as we always do at the end of this episode. But first, you can where to find us all on social medias and stuff. You can find me personally at Tyler_Plath, as you can tell in the lower corner here. You can find Cameron at Camelot317. You can find Lucas at Lucas Wenzel. To find the fellas, you can find the fellas at FFFellas. You can find the fellas on Instagram at the FFFellas. And on TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere else you can get your podcasts, Fantasy Football Fellas. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, as I always do, how's it going? How you doing? If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, you should do so. And then turn on that bell to get notified whenever we post, whether it's a podcast or whether it's our little minute clips or our shorts and all that kind of stuff. You get notified whenever we post. So hit that bell. Go ahead and give the video a like. I know, again, that's what every trendy YouTuber says, and since we are in the space now, I guess we got to say it too. So, last little plug though, if you want to become a league winner, and maybe I should phrase this like a question: do you want to become a league winner? Which I feel like the answer is yes. Then you should join our community full of league winners that is hosted by us, the fellas, over on Chalkboard. Okay, you get even more content from us that you don't see on any of our social media platforms. You get positional rankings every single week. You get waiver suggestions every single week. You get starts and sits, and you get that kind of advice. You get trade advice. You get player prop advice as well, which we'll go over later. And I'll just tell you, our list of player props are coming out later today. So, again, if you want to become a league winner, join our Chalkboard page. It is $0, 0 cents. It's almost worth asking why wouldn't you at this point, right? Again, Chalkboard, Chalkboard, completely free. Just search the Fantasy Football Fellas, and we are right there, and you become a league winner. So, we've got a full show here. We're going over my, because normally this is me and Lucas, but it is my starts of the week. We've got some news updates. But before we get to any of that, we officially kicked off week 13 on Thursday with the Bills and Patriots. So let's go over that game here real quick. Buffalo knocked off New England by a score of 24-10. And normally when Lucas and I do these episodes, we do 3 big questions where we look at the game, we come up with 3 questions that are worth discussing moving forward. So, in, good taste, we'll keep it going. So, first question that I'm going to ask myself, this is 2 weeks out of 3 that James Cook has double-digit carries and a second straight week with 5 or more targets. That's pretty good. Is he startable? That's the big question. Is he startable moving forward? And personally, my answer is that it's tough to say. You look at his upcoming schedule, he's got the Jets, he's got Miami, he's got Chicago, which you feel pretty good about. But then he finishes up with Cincinnati and New England again. So the schedule's iffy, very iffy down the stretch. With the inconsistencies in the carries, sure, there's relative consistent volume in terms of receiving work. I think the thing to definitively say yes is if he's startable is if he gets touchdowns. And the touchdowns are still falling to Devin Singletary, who did pick up a rushing touchdown in this game. Because of that, I'm still pumping the brakes on starting James Cook. I'm not shutting the door on it down the road, but as for right now, I need to see one more game where we see the rushing volume and the receiving volume come together. Because if that happens, then awesome. Then I would legitimately consider it. But if we consider it, it also is solved. I should say it like that. If James Cook gets inconsistent rushing work, gets consistent receiving work, but he starts finding the end zone, then you kind of have to, right? There's all these kind of scenarios where, if he's inconsistent in rushing, inconsistent in receiving, obviously no. If he's inconsistent in receiving, consistent in rushing, you will see. If you add in the touchdown, if you sprinkle that touchdown on top, then it makes everything that much better and that much more intriguing. So, definitive answer. I shouldn't say definitive. Final answer. Wait to see another week. The receiving work is nice. Got to see some more consistent rushing volume. And because of that, we then default to touchdowns, and I'm not seeing touchdowns just yet. So, next question we got is, can we really trust any Patriot wide receiver, including Jakobi Meyers, who has been the wide receiver one for this team this year? And the answer for me is no. This is Meyers' fourth straight week below double-digit fantasy points. And to be completely honest, I don't even think Meyers is their wide receiver one anymore. I think it's Ramondre Stevenson who's their wide receiver one. Stevenson's target numbers since week 6 go like this: 6, 5, 8, 7, 7, 6, 10, and 8. I don't even know if Meyers is top 5 since that. I shouldn't say that because there were some decent finishes from Meyers since week 6. But over the last 4 weeks, most definitely has not gotten over 6, maybe 7. Maybe I'll double check that because that's completely blasphemous if I'm getting that wrong and slandering the guy for no reason. But he's gotten no more than 6 targets the last 4 weeks. He's only gotten 1 game over 6 targets since week 6. Like we said for Stevenson. It was 13 against the Jets. All this to say, Stevenson's the wide receiver one in this offense. Meyers is their second option. I mentioned last week when they pushed the ball downfield, there's some intrigue to the wide receivers. Devontae Parker, who's the downfield threat. Tyquan Thornton, who can be a downfield threat. Nelson Aguilar, who can be a downfield threat at any moment. Really, any of these wide receivers can be downfield threats at any given moment. And against the Vikings, they pushed the ball downfield. And I said that there was some intrigue to those guys if they continue to push the ball downfield. That was the one thing I did not see in this game against the Bills. They did not go downfield as often as I thought they would have after kind of finding some success against the Vikings with it. And I know no defense is ever the same, and you got to game plan to the defense that you're facing, but it was so strange just how this offense for the Patriots just went back into this lull. And because of this, I'm not trusting any Patriots wide receiver, including Jakobi Meyers. The only receiver I'm trusting is Ramondre Stevenson, and he's their running back. That should explain it at length. Last question we got. Any Bills options that you can trust besides Stephon Diggs? Dawson Knox only got 1 target, 0 receptions. Gabe Davis only had 2 catches, and he was on the receiving end of that jump pass from Josh Allen right on the sideline. Isaiah McKenzie got decent work, I guess. What are we looking at here for the Bills' options? And if I'm completely honest, I haven't seen much from Gabe Davis since, he had his good game against the Vikings. But other than that, it has not really been great since their bye week. He's gone 5-5, 21 against Minnesota, 11 against Cleveland, 7 against Detroit, 9 against New England. He's been getting decent targets. He's gotten 7-5, 10, 7-5, 7, but his receptions are just not there. So he's gotten banked, or the touchdowns saved his week, and his week really wasn't that great this week. Isaiah McKenzie, though, on the other hand, he had his big game against Detroit. He backed it up with a 9-point performance, which isn't the worst, but it's also not the greatest. And Dawson Knox is inconsistent as all get out. So is there any other option that you can trust? I don't think so. And if I'm completely honest, obviously Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs are locked into your lineups the rest of the week. But I think there's more of an argument that James Cook can be the next build to find a starting lineup in fantasy football than Gabe Davis, than Isaiah McKenzie. And you know what I said about James Cook. That should give you context for where you should value Gabe Davis and value Isaiah McKenzie. And when you're evaluating for a starting lineup and you're like, do I start Gabe Davis this week? Hopefully that gives you some context as to what I think. So that'll finish the recap that we have for Buffalo taking down New England in New England 24-10. We're going to move on to news and notes. This is the stuff that really matters because we are now one day away from game day, and there will be news that comes out even more today. So I highly recommend following guys like Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, Tom Pelissero, Mike Garafolo. Caught myself. I would highly recommend following those, but for those of you that have missed over the last day or so what has happened in terms of news and updates, got them for you right here. So, news and notes brought to you by our friends over at Sleeper, the number one fantasy platform in the world. It's the one that we use all the time for almost every league that we have. You can join over 4 million people playing fantasy sports on Sleeper by using the link down in the description of this video or in the audio podcast that you are listening to. So, thank you, Sleeper. We love Sleeper. It is the fantasy manager's ultimate tool. Can't recommend it enough. So, first piece of news. There was an NFL executive who did not name themselves, and the report did not name who this executive is. But this exec said that there's considerable doubt around the league that Odell could contribute this season as he's still recovering from his ACL injury, which kind of is on par. If I'm not mistaken, it was the second tear in this ACL. A second tear takes longer to recover than just your first tear. And he tore it in the Super Bowl, which takes place in February. So if it normally takes about 10 months or so, or at least it should take about 8, 9, 10 months to recover from an ACL injury, a second should take even longer. So what this means for fantasy, though, I think you can probably let him go. It sounds like, he's wanting a multi-year deal. Dallas, and I saw this report somewhere, Dallas is willing to make that happen. But for me, if Odell is looking for a multi-year contract, it's because he knows he's not playing this season. He wants to be locked into a team that he can, get, with in the offseason and training camp, all that kind of stuff. He's wanting to do that because he knows he's not playing this year. I think you can drop Odell at this point. Next piece of news, Deebo Samuel got a light session in on Friday's practice, but there's still some pessimism with his questionable label for Sunday. It's not the worst thing for all the other 49er players if Deebo misses this game, right? Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, maybe Jawan Jennings, who had his kind of appearance last week. Obviously, San Francisco wants to win this game, right? They are on a win streak right now, probably playing some of the best football in the league right now. And they've got the Dolphins coming into town, so yeah, they obviously want to beat the best. I shouldn't say the best, one of the best teams in the league. But you do think long-term as well. And it would not be surprising if Deebo is out. I would have a backup plan in, ready for Deebo because they play in the 325 slot. So yes, have a plan B if Deebo doesn't go. Next piece of news in the same game, just for the Dolphins, Raheem Mostert is back this week, and for you Jeff Wilson managers, that is something to be aware of. Jeff Wilson probably still will take, majority of work because that's what we've seen over the past couple of weeks, besides last week because Mostert didn't play. But again, just context for what to expect from a guy like Jeff Wilson this week. Justin Fields is good to go for this Sunday, so you're putting him back in your lineup. Signs are pointing to Jamar Chase being back this week. You're putting him in your lineup because it's Jamar Chase. Najee Harris himself said that he'll play this week against Atlanta. It remains to be seen exactly how much of a workload he takes. But I think if Najee Harris is saying, yeah, I'm back, he's going to play with the full workload. Joe Mixon still remains in concussion protocol. Now, this is very interesting. If you have Samaje Perine, you can throw him into your flex this week. I know he did much better against Tennessee. Let me rewind it. Samaje Perine did a lot better than I expected him to when the Bengals took on Tennessee last week. Because Tennessee's run defense is top 5, top 3, toughest in the league. And he put up a decent game. Now he gets Kansas City, and Kansas City's defense is not Tennessee's defense by any stretch of the imagination. You can probably throw Perine into your flex. He's probably a low-end running back 2 at this point. If Mixon doesn't go, if Mixon plays, then Perine then obviously is not in your lineup. But Joe Mixon, still in concussion protocol. Something to look out for throughout the rest of today. David Njoku is likely out this week, which I don't really think matters a whole lot because if you listen to Week 13 preview, I said you probably shouldn't start Deshaun Watson this week. I can, he may make me eat my words. That's okay, though. Travis Etienne is good to go. Michael Carter, doubtful for the Jets this week. So it looks like the work is going to go to Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight, which is the best nickname, Bam Knight. And Ty Johnson, if James Robinson is still a healthy scratch, and that remains to be seen. Josh Jacobs is officially questionable, and I said this in a Week 13 preview also. I'm not going to deal with the headache of who's going to get the majority of work. If Jacobs misses this game, you can just leave that. So go ahead and take that. Personally, for me, I'm not going to deal with that kind of headache. And let me go back to that David Njoku update. Him likely being out should also just be a indicator to not play Watson this week. Houston's run defense is really, really bad. The Browns would be stupid to not exploit that. Now, and then Watson's now down a weapon. Yes, he's still got Donovan Peoples-Jones and Amari Cooper and stuff, but he does not have Njoku, which helps. And Njoku helps out that offense. So, no Watson this week for me. that injury for Njoku just confirms it for me. So those are our news and notes. Again, brought to you by our friends over at Sleeper. You can check them out with the link in the description of the audio podcast you are listening to or the YouTube video that you're watching right now. So let's go into my starts of the week. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. And again, we tried to clarify this. I think it was last week's episode, maybe 2 weeks ago. We tried to clarify exactly, what is a start of the week? Because obviously, I could say Austin Eckler is a start for running back, Patrick Mahomes for quarterback. Starts of the week are really just players that we believe will outperform the projections, outperform the whatever kind of game you think the player will have. We are saying they will do even better than that. So, starting with the quarterback, my start of the week at quarterback is none other than the savior of the Jets franchise, Mike White. He went 2 for 28 against the Bears, throwing for 315 and had 3 touchdowns in an absolute downpour. Now he goes indoors to Minnesota, and Minnesota is allowing the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. Pretty straightforward for me. And I was going through the preview episode trying to give you context for where I'm ranking Mike White this week. I have him as a better play than Tua. I have him as a better play than Kirk Cousins. I have him as a better play than Jimmy Garoppolo, who has been really good for the Niners this year. I'm going Mike White. I know Mike White because I have him in one of my leagues. He's only projected like 12, 13 fantasy points. I'm expecting like 18, 19, upwards of that. Running back, start of the week for me, Dameon Pierce. I'm opening my heart back up again to get hurt because Dameon Pierce the last 2 weeks has not had good games because teams are pretty much selling out to stop Dameon Pierce at this point. And that's a tough scene. It's a tough scene. But here's the thing. He finally gets a favorable matchup. Yes, it's the Browns. Does it really make sense? Yes, it does. It absolutely makes sense because Cleveland is allowing the 3rd most rushing touchdowns, the 9th most rushing yards, the 2nd most fantasy points, like running backs on the year. This is the weakness of the Cleveland defense is the run game. This is the kind of defense that Dameon Pierce will be able to run on and run well on. So yes, Dameon Pierce had almost played himself out of lineups last 2 weeks based on, volume and production, all that kind of stuff. But I think this is the bounce back game for Dameon Pierce. Mike White was my quarterback start of the week. Dameon Pierce was my running back start of the week. On a wide receiver, and I said this in the Week 13 preview episode, it's Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk, who has been a top 15 wide receiver on the year. I'm going to say that to be safe. I think he's a wide receiver 10 on the year, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, he's a wide receiver 10 on the year. He's a top 10 wide receiver, so you're starting him. But here's the thing. I'm expecting Christian Kirk to be pushing top 5 on the week. Detroit is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers. Awesome. But here's the other thing. They're allowing the most fantasy points to slot to the wide receiver who lines up in the slot the most. For the Jaguars, that's Christian Kirk. This is the perfect matchup for Christian Kirk. Yes, he's a wide receiver 10. He's a top 10 wide receiver. He's going to be pushing a top 5 finish this week, in my opinion. And I think this is just going to be a good week for wide receivers in general. I mean, there were 3 other wide receivers I considered for my start of the week. Garrett Wilson going up against the Vikings, because we all know the Vikings defense is not good against quarterbacks. Or I should just say it like this. The Vikings stink in the passing game. I almost thought about A.J. Brown. Revenge game going up against Tennessee. pretty straightforward for me. Chris Godwin going up against the Saints because they take away Mike Evans. Chris Godwin just feasts on the Saints. Those three were in the running, but Christian Kirk took the cake. Got the best matchup, and the numbers don't lie. Tight end start of the week for me. This one's a bit of a... I'm cheating on this one because you're going to hear this and you're going to be like, sure, duh. It's Cole Kmet, okay? Maybe it's not so much duh, but once I explain it, it's going to be like, well, yeah, duh, that makes sense. Darnell Mooney's out for the year. Who is Justin Fields going to throw the ball to? Certainly ain't Chase Claypool. Because I remember when Claypool got traded to the Bears, I even said, like, well, so there's some intrigue here, because he's now in a less crowded, situation as he was in Pittsburgh. Fields is going to like a bigger target. And guess what? He's done absolutely nothing. So, Claypool's out of the running for the guy that Fields is probably going to lean on the most. You could probably see a bit of a David Montgomery receiving game against the Packers, but back to Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet is the guy that has done the best out of all Bears options. I'm not saying he is the best. Out of all Bears options, Cole Kmet has done the best and has been the priority, maybe second option, Darnell Mooney to Justin Fields this year. Now that there's no Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet just step right in as that number one option. And if not number one option because they want to use David Montgomery or something, he's number two still. Cole Kmet, my start of the week at tight end. We blaze through starts of the week. Let me recap. Quarterback start is Mike White. Running back start is Dameon Pierce. Wide receiver start is Christian Kirk. My tight end start is Cole Kmet. I'm just kind of looking at the, we're pushing 28 minutes or so into this episode. And I know Lucas, when he's done this solo before, he's like, wow, time flies when it's just one. That's true. It really is. It really is true. It flies when you're by yourself. But I need my boys back. Lucas, I need you back. Cameron, it's been too long. We need to do an episode together soon. All right. Last segment here to wrap up this episode. We're going to keep it real short and sweet for you. Player props provided by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. And if you're watching on YouTube, you just saw me lean out of the way because I've got this Underdog Fantasy flag in my room. It's sick. I love it. We're going to go through some of their player props and their higher, lower. You can string 5 picks. Let me start that over. You can string 3 or more, 2 or more picks. If you string 5 picks, hit them all, you win 20 times your money. So you can check us out on Underdog. Use the link in any of our social bios. You can find a link to Underdog. Use the code FELLAS when you're signing up. You get a 100% deposit match on your first deposit up to $100. So I've got a couple here that I want to run through. They're all overs for me. I like taking the overs because, the overs are much more fun to watch. It's probably more smart to take unders, but I searched the overs, and I think I've got a pretty good list this week. So let's start with Garrett Wilson, who just missed out on my start of the week at wide receiver. Underdog has this very cool fantasy point line. His line is at 11.65 on the week. It is half PPR, so that is worth considering, and that is worth keeping in mind. But I'm taking the over on this one, okay? Minnesota's allowing the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And because it is half PPR, he'll need to score, and I think he does that this week. I think he does against Minnesota. Give me the over in Garrett Wilson at 11.65 fantasy points on the week. I know I'm trying to remember. I got when his line first came out, it came out at 53.5. And within a day or two, his line jumped up to like 60, 63 receiving yards. I think his line currently sits at 60. I should double check that. It's at 60.5. I still feel confident in a 60.5 from Garrett Wilson against this Minnesota defense. So if you don't like the fantasy line, I get it. He's also at 5 receptions, 5 even. Probably want to avoid that because, that's just pure strategy. But I don't mind the 60.5. I like the fantasy points. Give me the over on the fantasy points. Aaron Jones at 58.5 rushing yards against Chicago this week. What say you, Ty? Over again. I said this at the beginning. They're all over, so I probably don't need to say it, but I feel like I need to. Chicago is allowing the 4th most rushing yards on the year, the 6th most over the last 2 weeks. And that's over 100 games pretty much in both games. This is going to be one of those like efficient Aaron Jones rushing games because for whatever reason, when he gets carries, he does well. But when he gets like 13 or less carries, he just doesn't do great. I think this is the week where Green Bay kind of plans and game plans around the run. So give me the over on 58.5. And I will say this. If Green Bay doesn't give Aaron Jones 15 or more carries, they lose this game. You heard it here first. If the Green Bay Packers don't give Aaron Jones 15 or more carries, they lose this game. On to the next prop that I got. I got Christian Kirk, my starter of the week. 64.5 receiving yards. You already know what I'm saying. It's an over, and it's an easy over. Easy over. Detroit stinks against wide receivers. They stink even more against slot wide receivers. Christian Kirk is a slot wide receiver. Let's move on. Jalen Waddle at 66.5 receiving yards. It's an over again. And I know it's not the greatest matchup going up against San Francisco, but he's gone over 66.5 in all but 3 games this year. And one of those games, he finished with 66. So I'm just going to count it as 2. And I know 66.5, so you still lose at 66. Point being, Jalen Waddle goes over this line every week because in the 2 games that he didn't, he had a backup quarterback and he was playing hurt. Every other week it's been an over. Okay. The Dolphins showed last week going up against the Texans. They don't care who they face. They're going to throw the ball. We thought it was going to be a big Jeff Wilson game. They were up 30-0 at halftime on the back of Tua, Waddle, and Tyreek. They don't care who they play, good or bad. They're going to throw the ball. This could be a big Tyreek game as well. His line, I think, is at 90.5 receiving yards, which that's a little, I'm not going to say it's a little rich because like the Tyreek could literally go off for like 180. It's going to be that kind of game. I shouldn't say it's going to be that kind of game. If Miami wants to keep pace, if they want to keep pace, that's the way I'll say it. If they want to keep pace with the Niners, they're going to need a big game from Tua, Waddle, and Tyreek. And I think they can do it. So give me the over. Give me the over on Jalen Waddle at 66.5 receiving yards. And I got 3 more here for us. Kenneth Walker at pretty much an anytime rushing touchdown. That's what it is. It's 0.5 rushing touchdown, so it's anytime rushing touchdown. Give me that. Give me that. Last 3 weeks, he's got 2 games with 2 rushing touchdowns. Now he goes up against the Rams, and the Rams will not have Aaron Donald this week. That defense is going to look very, very different without Aaron Donald. So give me the over. And even if Aaron Donald plays, to be honest with you, I would still take the over on Kenneth Walker anytime rushing touchdown. That one feels pretty nice. Next one, Gus Edwards at 55.5 rushing yards. It's confirmed. John Harbaugh confirmed it. this week. J.K. Dobbins will not be playing in this game, so it is the Gus Edwards, Kenyon Drake kind of backfield, but Gus Edwards does take bulk of carries. The Ravens are taking on Denver this week, and Denver's run defense is the weakness of this defense. They allow the 11th most rushing yards, but here's the catch. They have allowed the 3rd most the last 2 weeks. This matchup for the Ravens is coming at the right time. Because I shouldn't say it's coming at the right time. It's the ideal matchup for Baltimore. That they don't have to try to throw it. They can just run on this defense. Give me the over on 55.5 for Gus Edwards. And let me find, you know what? Let's do this. I want to prove this even further. Gus Edwards, before last week, missed 2 weeks. In the 2 games he played before that, he went 66 and 65. He had 52 against Jacksonville. I'm not concerned about the 52, if I'm completely honest. And I think Jacksonville has allowed less rushing yards to running backs on the year than Denver. 55 is an over for me. Last one we got here, George Pickens at 48.5 receiving yards, over. Atlanta is allowing the 2nd most receiving yards to wide receivers. The only team that's worse than Atlanta to like fantasy points and all those kind of stats to wide receivers, it's Pittsburgh. You can't trust any Atlanta wide receiver. Give me George Pickens 48.5. That's 3 catches, and he is kind of a bigger. When I say bigger play, I'm not saying like highlights. I'm saying yards of 15 or more yards. Pickens does that regularly. George Pickens, I pretty much just needs 3 or more catches, in my opinion, to get over 48.5. And I think he does, because it's Atlanta. So, again, let me go through those props. These will be included on our Chalkboard drop, where there will be even more coming out later tonight again. Garrett Wilson at 11.65 fantasy points, over. Aaron Jones at 58.5 rushing yards, over. Christian Kirk, 64.5 receiving yards, over. Jalen Waddle, 66.5 receiving yards, is an over. Kenneth Walker, anytime rushing touchdown, over. Gus Edwards at 55.5 rushing yards, over. George Pickens, 48.5 receiving yards, over. Again, all these lines and even more are provided by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. You can check them out on any of our social links. You can check them out in the link of this video as well. So, with that wraps up our Week 13 Stardom Saturday episode. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. Again, my name is Tyler Plath. I'm normally joined with Lucas Wenzel and by Cameron Lawrence. The 3 of us make up the Fantasy Football Fellas. You can find me on Twitter at Tyler_Plath, Lucas at Lucas Wenzel, Cameron at CamLaw317. You can find the Fellas on Twitter at FFFellas, on Instagram at TheFFFellas, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, Fantasy Football Fellas. Thanks for tuning in. Best of luck, I should say. Wow. Best of luck to all of you in Week 13 as we start gearing up for the playoffs here. Let's lock up some seeds. Let's lock up some high seeds again this week. So, best of luck to you. We will catch you all on our Week 13 recap episode coming out next Tuesday with Lucas and Cameron. Until then, deuces.